Time is flying when you're having fun, and we're at the last episode for 1988. So before we jump into 1989, let's see how this year ended. In Slimey's mind, you're not your typical hero. I mean, you are a hero, but not the same as always, at least when we talk about games. You're a frog, a space frog, and you've crashed on an asteroid field losing parts of your ship. To repair it, you have to find and collect all the parts that were scattered throughout the asteroid field. So you start on the field itself with asteroids lined up in a grid and have to jump on them till you get to the one with cavern entrance indicated by the black square. Then enter it and search for the part that may be inside. Each cavern has many rooms, and to progress to the next you need to collect a red gem. Red gem appears after you've defeated plenty enough respawning enemies in the room, so that they would drop 10 blue gems overall. Collecting a red gem not only allows you to move to the next room in the cavern, but also wipes all the enemies and their spawning capabilities in the room. That said, if you don't move to the next one within 10 seconds, a laser will appear trying to snipe you. But don't get distracted with gems and riches, you're there to collect your ship parts. So if you see any, always grab them as soon as possible, as it will allow you to move to another cavern on another asteroid faster. I failed to mention that the asteroid grid may have different symbols on them, and they all correspond to different actions that happen when you jump on them. Regular asteroids disappear after they've been jumped on 4 times. Ones with an arrow automatically bounce you in the direction arrow is facing. Question mark 1 will transport you to another asteroid in the field. A skull one kills you instantly, and a black square I've mentioned before is an entrance to the cavern. The evil Sorcerer Lord has started an offensive on a peaceful country of Galanor. You're once again a hero that will save the land. This time, however, not with your courage, strength or dexterity. Your mind and tactical know-how are your best weapons in Sorcerer Lord, because it's a fantasy medieval warfare turn-based strategy, and also a mouthful. The game takes place in a top-down 2D hexagonal grid map, where you and the Shadow Lord face each other's armies. The goal is to capture all of the enemy's garrisons and not lose your own. Both of you can recruit armies, move them and attack. And while it seems simple, there is a surprising layer of tactics and strategy when taking in mind things like leader statistics, units fatigue, terrain and how certain races fight better or worse in particular locations. Each battle has a very specific time limit in turns, dependent on the chosen difficulty level. Sorcerer Lord is perhaps not the best tactical strategy out there, but it's a good one and worth having a go at if you're a fan of a genre. When I was a kid in the 80s, my parents used to leave me at my grandma's house on the seaside for more or less half of the summer break. Now, there was a huge beautiful forest there, just a step away from her house, and you could get to the beach through that forest in around 10-15 minutes tops. The whole area was magical and radiating summer and nature vibes. A dream holiday location for those who want to get away from civilization and just rest in the wild while still having roof over their head. Cool story, eh? Now, being the kid that I was, I always went there with my C64. Cause while the outside was fun and all, I was all about those games, and leaving them behind was not an option at all. So, one of those hot summers, my C64 tape deck broke down. Now, that was an issue of astronomical proportions to my young self. I mean, I still had few weeks left there, and no way of fixing it. I dreaded the thought that I would have to spend the time outside in the sun playing with a stick in the forest or whatever people do without their computers. Probably die, cause one just would without the computer, right? I think that was one of the unwritten mystical rules of the 80s. If your computer broke down and you didn't fix it in time, that was it, the end. Am I correct in assuming that? Anyway, I was devastated to say the least. I know, crazy you must be thinking, but I loved the machine and my games. Fortunately, my older cousin who lived nearby came to my rescue. He let me borrow his disk drive and a whole box of floppies. That changed everything. Suddenly I was granted access to games I never even heard of, those that only released on diskettes and had no tape versions. Thinking about it today, I realized that some probably did, especially in their cracked, illegal form, but most didn't. And one of those games I learned of, other than the brilliant Sid Meier's Pirates, was Steel Thunder. It offered a simulation of proportions I never experienced before. It was as if I could just sit in that tank and easily switch between the driver, gunner or commander's positions, and steer it all by myself in one of countless operations everywhere from Cuba to Europe. It was a marvel. And I suppose it still can be, even to this day, if you give Steel Thunder a chance and allow yourself to get lost in the imaginary conflicts that it serves. Epics were the masters of multi-event sports games in the 80s. No one could compare. But everyone wanted piece of that pie. So many tried, and most failed. Today's title, Summer Challenge aka Summer Olympiad, is one that didn't. I mean, it did not steal the crown or even came close to it, but it was a decent challenger and a fun, even if a tad limited selection of disciplines. The game offers 5 of these: skeet, hurdles, fencing, triple jump and diving. And it's a good mix, I must add. If it was only supplemented by additional 2 free, it could have possibly really compete with Epics. Graphics and sound-wise, Summer Challenge is really nice for C64 and plays well too. but it was too little too late, I'm afraid. Zybex is original horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. You're playing as convict, or a pair of them if there's two of you, Casalana and Rinser, and they're trying to escape from galactic prison and acquire Zybex, crystal that would grant them amnesty. The game is composed out of 16 levels, and after completing each, you get one crystal. They are used to unlock later levels, though levels 2 to 12 are accessible as soon as you complete the first. Extra lives are awarded at every 10,000 points or by collecting appropriate pickups. The most unique feature of Zybex, however, is easily its weapons system. Your gun shoots automatically and the fire button is used to cycle through available weapons. All of them can be upgraded up to 4 times, and you do so by collecting pickups with appropriate icons. Whenever you lose a life, currently selected weapon is degraded by 1 level, or removed from your armament if it was already at the lowest grade. The weapons are Orbiter, which is your basic shot, multi-shot, that goes from 2-way to 8-way with upgrades, railgun, a single strong projectile, pulse, and finally a wall, that increases in size when bettered. Graphically and sound-wise, Zybex is pretty good. Perhaps not on the level of the best games on the system, but there's really nothing to complain about here. But most importantly, it plays great, and that's what you should really take out of all I just said. Everyone knows Contra, aka Gryzor. At least I think so. But not many people know that it's actually not a NES original, but an arcade game that was ported to many home systems of the late 80s. I mean, I do not wonder why NES is most folks' first association, as its version was so iconic, such a marvel that it's the easiest one to recall. But we don't speak of Nintendo games on this channel, because of how friendly and understanding they are to YouTubers covering their content. What? I can't say that, man. I know it's true, but it's not something I could repeat, alright? Okay, I'll try. So, my assistant, you may know him as Manbat or whatever, told me to tell you that if he had to save Big N's buildings from buddies, anybody's, even video gamed ones, he wouldn't. He told me that he'd let the Joker go to town on their HQ. And while I understand the sentiment, I do not agree with it. Anyway, Contra is horizontally scrolling shooter, for the most part at least, where you and a friend get to run right ways, shooting enemies with different weapons and generally serving tough love to anything and anyone in your way. I said that it's mostly horizontally scrolling, as some stages scroll vertically, and there are also from behind the back maze-like stages too. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato. Horizontal levels is what we remember Contra for, right? Don't answer that, I don't want to be disappointed. There are 4 power-ups in the game: standard rifle, scatter, which is your try-shooting spread shot, powerful laser, and barrier. Interestingly enough, Commodore's version only has 6 levels out of Arcade's 10, but they're divided into 9 stages overall. In the end, is Contra / Gryzor on C64 a good game? It's decent, but not great, and nowhere near the quality of NES Classic. The fact that you have to press space to jump is a heavily contributing factor to this judgment. While it's okay for occasional bomb or grenade in other titles, in Contra it's unacceptable, as you basically jump all the freaking time. Shootout takes place in a desert landscape of Gulch Creek, and is an arcade western themed shooter. You play as a quick hand Luke, which coincidentally is also the name of my third sex tape, and you complete levels for points in a vein similar but not identical to Operation Wolf, because you cannot target precisely, as the crosshair moves constantly, seemingly simulating shaking of your hand. I think it was supposed to be more realistic. In reality it just feels more difficult than it should. Each level is comprised of 2 stages. First is static, in which you shoot at cans and have to hit a certain number in given time. If you miss the mark by even 1, the game is over. Second stage sees you entering the part of Gulch Creek and shooting various bodies throughout it. There are far fewer of these than in Operation Wolf, usually just a few per building, all because of how the aforementioned crosshair works. I'm not sure if video gives it away, but if you'll play Shootout, you'll get what I mean instantly. I'm gonna be honest with you, I never particularly liked Shootout, and from what Batman's miming to me while munching on a burger, I don't think he did either. What? Okay, I see. He's saying while spraying half-chewed bits of a clearly stale burger that he likes the idea of crime fighting, but the gameplay is not his butt of tea. Oh, and that he's Batman. Seriously, dude, you gonna make me do that in every video now? Anyway, do 2 things. First, ignore Bruce. Then try the game out and make up your own mind while I start looking for a new assistant. Slayer was a budget horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up that was surprisingly good. Or is, actually, rather than was. It could be argued that it is better than some full-price titles. But since it only features 3 stages, the budget pricing was more than appropriate, I think. High difficulty level made up for the lack of content with repeatable playthroughs. Graphically, it looks very similar to I.O. that we've covered in the past, to the point that some sprites look as if they were ripped from it. It's obviously not the case, but the similarities are uncanny. It has to be said, however, that aforementioned I.O. was definitely harder, so there's that. Anyway, graphically and sound-wise, Slayer is of very high quality, with various colorful enemies, big and small, and a decent music that apparently used sampled drums. It also has various weapons, satellite helpers and big bosses, so all the genre staples bases are covered here. It's a good even if short game, but if you like shooters, you won't be disappointed. Star Wars Empire Strikes Back is the second official franchise-based game on the C64 and also a port from the arcades. It's a first-person vector wireframe graphics arcade shooter depicting 4 action sequences straight from the movie. First is on planet Hoth, where you must destroy series of Imperial probe droids. In second, you're pitted against the Imperial walkers that you can defeat either by shooting them down by targeting a small area on their heads or by tangling their legs with tow cables like in the movie. Well, not exactly like in the movie, but in the same spirit. These cables are limited, however, so you'll be straight up shooting walkers one way or another. In third sequence, you're flying the Millennium Falcon and have to destroy TIE fighters in space. Simple as that. In the fourth and final, you still fly Millennium Falcon, because why not, and have to get through dense asteroid field avoiding collisions. When all 4 are completed, the game keeps carrying on from the first stage at raised difficulty. While I prefer Star Trek to Star Wars for what seems a book worth of reasons, these Star Wars games have always been fun, even if a tiny bit more on the difficult side. There are 2 games called Storm Warrior on C64. First is from 1984 and is extremely basic looking but genuinely fun for the time it released in. This second game has nothing to do with the first and is a side-scrolling medieval fantasy themed romp. An evil witch cursed your lands, bringing a century-long storm over it, causing floods, hurricanes and tornadoes all throughout the land. So you, as the honorable prince and the heir to the throne, decide to do something about it. Namely find the witch and whoop her ass with the broom she flew on so hard that she would stop her shenanigans once and for all. Storm Warrior is a side-scrolling arcade beat-em-up where you travel the land slowly cutting your way through the evil witch's goons and monsters on your way to her castle. You can attack high and low, or more likely high and mid, defend, kick and roll, which may not seem like much today but for the time on C64 was more than enough. Gameplay-wise, Storm Warrior is not bad, but it never crossed the invisible imaginary line to pass on the good side. It's an average title, and while it's worth a playthrough, I'm not sure it's worth more than one. Speaking of games not worth it, you know how you only remember Street Fighter 2 and not 1? Because it wasn't very good. And C64's outing, or outings I should say really, are not good either. And we have 2 of these, European and US releases respectively. And unlucky for you, you will get to witness both of them here. US release features much higher resolution sprites and pretty decent backgrounds. The characters, however, are so cartoony that they look odd performing various moves and attacks. The story unfolds around Ryu defeating 9 opponents to become the champion. European one uses much lower resolution blocky graphics for both character sprites and backgrounds. They are fugly to say at least, but they're more realistic if that even makes sense, so look less childish. Also, this version sees Ryu defeating 10 opponents to win. Honestly, both versions are utter crap and are only featured in this video as they are important titles in history of gaming, being responsible for their brilliant direct follow-up, which coincidentally was also hot garbage on C64, but that's a story for another video. Scuba Kidz is the first game ever I recall completing on C64, albeit with use of trainers, but I did. It also means that it's the first game I remember completing out of all I ever played. And that's why it has a very special place in my memory. I'm highlighting the fact as it's generally considered to be average at best, sometimes not even that. For me, it was amazing and I refuse to play it ever again, as I feel that my recollection of it may change dramatically. So yeah, that's how it is. You play as a scuba diver who has to navigate series of underwater caves and locales, searching for his kidnapped friends. You have a limited supply of air and when it's close to running out you have to resurface to refill it. Alternatively, you can find an air tank which extends the time that you can stay submerged. As you go about your mission, you get to find various useful items like keys, bubble powers, which allow you to shoot bubbles, extra speed and a monster that scares off underwater creatures. Some passages are blocked behind locked gates or destructible walls. First can be opened with aforementioned keys, second have to be shot with bubbles. Between the levels you face a small boss in the form of a shark, so you gotta jaws it to survive. Oh yeah, and from today it's a verb. To jaws means to kill a shark in bloody, messy, often barely successful way, risking your limb and life all the way throughout the fight. Note it down. Oh, I didn't direct it at you guys, I said it to Batman, he could take some notes at the very least. Terms of Lore is an action-adventure with some light role-playing elements. After the disappearance of the king, Kingdom of Albereth needs a new champion to save it from invading barbarian forces. Batman is unavailable as he's working here now, so believe it or not, you're the one to do it. Either as a strong barbarian, armored knight, or a quick and nimble Valkyrie. You could obviously go as yourself, but where's the fun in that, right? The game is real-time and has a working day-night cycle. You could say that Times of Lore is an early draft for what modern Ultima games would end up being. Even saying it now seems funny. Modern Ultima games. Oh my days. Anyway, on your travels you'll encounter various kinds of enemies like skeletons, orcs and rogues among others. No Joker or Riddler though, so that's probably why Batman's still on my couch eating Pringles. Not a sponsor. And you'll collect potions, increasingly better weapons and search for special powerful artifacts to restore the strength to the kingdom. Times of Lore is quite fun and definitely a game worth checking out. Even if one I haven't given as much time as it deserved back in the day. How does one follow one of the most important games of the decade? Most would try to repeat the formula, change bits and pieces, but not as much, so the final product would end up distinctively different. And that's basically what Lucasfilm Games did with Zack McKracken and the alien Mindbenders. A second point-and-click adventure game after Maniac Mansion to use the Scum engine. The game is still a comedic telling of an unlikely story that's over the top but in the same time captivating. You're Zack McKracken, a tabloid reporter, and you have to stop evil aliens who are reducing people's intelligence by use of global telephone system. And that is why we prefer texting over talking on these monstrosities, folks. Anyway, this time the adventure is not confined to one building and surrounding areas but will take you all around the world, as the danger posed by the aliens' evil plan is universal and not personal. Same as in Maniac Mansion though, Zack will have co-heroes to help him, Annie, Melissa and Leslie. And many of the puzzles have different solutions as well. It's perhaps not as good game as Maniac Mansion, but it's only a tiny touch weaker than the previous game, and following a masterpiece is a difficult task. I mean, look at Batman. He's a top-class superhero, no doubt about that, but how can he even try to stack up against you? He works in Gotham, you've saved universes. There's no comparison really. Alright, it's clear now that while 1988 was not a bad year, and some really amazing games came out, it cannot compare to 1987, even judging by the sheer volume of amazing releases. I've dropped 5 episodes covering over 100 games for 1987, 1988 has 3, and this third is shorter than the other 2. It doesn't mean that 88 was disappointing, quite the opposite, it just means that many of the devs and gamers started noticing new and exciting 16-bit machines, and moving to them enchanted with their capabilities and all the beeps and boops and white-collar palettes. The works. That said, we're far from being done, as C64 had few more good years and we'll covering them soon. For now, let's leave 1988 behind. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's the thumbs down there too, but I suppose if you really didn't, you wouldn't have persevered up to this point to hear me say it. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next video or not, other than subscribing and hitting the bell, that is. And that bell is amazing. Even Batman thinks so, as whenever the new video's out, YouTube will actually also send you small and friendly notification about it so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are awesome way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also members of either get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are pretty darn good too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were cut and stitched together to serve as a background to my commentary. Thank you. They're all amazing and retro community heroes and deserve your subscription. They all have mine. Even those channels that are no longer active, as I secretly hope that Batman will pay them a visit and convince them to come back. You will find names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running and in the video description below. Make sure to let them know how cool they are. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.